Hello viewers and learners. In the series of international relations theory, I was discussing liberalism in international relations. So now we'll focus on some of the core ideas of liberal thinking in international relations. One of the core ideas of liberal thinking in IR is exploring the possibility of perpetual peace. According to liberal scholars, peace is the normal state of affairs. If we go by the words of Kant, he said that peace can be perpetual. The laws of nature dictated harmony and cooperation between peoples. War is therefore both unnatural and irrational, an artificial contrivance and not a product of some peculiarity of human nature. Now, this particular observation by Kant is very important. So here he says that war is unnatural, it is not natural. Rather, peace is natural. War is also irrational, so there can be no rationality or no reason that can justify a war. And war is also not a product of human nature, or it is not associated with human nature. A belief in progress and the perfectibility of human condition. So liberal scholars, they also believe in the perfectibility of human condition, and they have their faith in the power of human reason and the capacity of human beings to realize their inner potential. They remain confident that the strain of war can be removed from human experience. So liberal scholars, they rely on human nature, on the rationality of human nature, and they believe that time will come when human beings will realize that war are not in the interest of humanity and when wars can be permanently removed. Immanuel Kant and Jeremy Bentham were the two leading liberals of the Enlightenment age. Both have reacted to the barbarity of international relations and led them individually to elaborate plans for perpetual peace. For Kant, the imperative to achieve perpetual peace requires the transformation of individual consciousness, republican constitutionalism, and a federal contract between states to abolish war rather than to regulate it as earlier international lawyers had argued. This federation can be likened to a permanent peace treaty rather than a superstate actor or world government. Immanuel Kant, in his Perpetual Peace, he draw a philosophical sketch which has three definitive articles. The first definitive article is, the civil constitution of every state shall be republican. The consent of the citizens is required to decide whether or not war is to be declared. So when you will have a civil constitution or a republican constitution, the highest authority of the state, it would be accountable to the people, and when it will be accountable to the people, it has to justify any action that they take. Or, in other words, they have to take the consent of citizens before deciding whether war should be declared or not. The second definitive article is, the right of nations shall be based on a federation of free states. Peace can neither be inaugurated nor secured without a general agreement between the nations. Thus, a particular kind of league, which we call a Pacific Federation, is required. So here Kant emphasized that there should be some kind of a federation. You may even call it a Pacific Federation. It is required where states, they should have some general consensus regarding peace. Third definitive article is, cosmopolitan rights shall be limited to condition of universal hospitality. It means that all the individuals, they should have certain rights that has a universal applicability. It means all the countries, all the states, they should respect a certain rights of individuals. You may even call them human rights. And those human rights, they are not bound by any territory or by the laws of the state. They should be universally applicable and respected. Liberal scholars, they also believe in democratic peace thesis. So there is a democratic peace theory in international relations. This democratic peace theory is associated with Kant and Doyle. So Kant claimed that liberal states are pacific in their international relations with other liberal states was revived in the late 1980s in a much cited article of Michel Doyle, who has argued that liberal states have created a separate peace. According to Doyle, there are two elements to the Kantian legacy. First, restraint among liberal states, and second, international imprudence in relation with non-liberal states. So here Doyle is dividing the states between liberal states or say democratic states and non-liberal states or say autocracies or authoritarian regimes. Doyle also recognized liberal democracies are the aggressive or could be as aggressive as any other type of state in their relations with authoritarian regimes and stateless people. So while on one hand liberal democracies they will not go and fight a war against each other, they could be as aggressive as possibly any other kind of state could be in their relationship with authoritarian regime. So here there is a distinction in the behavior of liberal democratic states towards another liberal democratic states and towards authoritarian regimes. For the theory to be compelling, an explanation needs to be given as to why war has become unthinkable between liberal states. So here democratic peace theorists they have tried to justify that why war shouldn't be there. So what should be the rationality behind this particular thought that war should be discouraged. Kant had argued that if the decision to use force was taken by the people rather than by the prince, then the frequency of conflicts would be drastically reduced. An alternative explanation for the democratic peace thesis might be that liberal states tend to be wealthy and therefore have less to gain and of course more to lose by engaging in conflicts with the poorer authoritarian states. So here there are 2-3 justifications that why democracies will not fight against each other. So one of the justification is that in liberal countries or in liberal democratic states there are internal pressures. Second thing, they also have this larger understanding that through a war they are going to lose more rather than to secure more. So it is always better to work for peace. Liberal states tend to be in relations of amity with other liberal states, but this is not true about authoritarian states or dictatorships. There are certain limitations to this democratic peace theory, and contrary to like the first criticism or limitation is that it is contrary to historical evidence. Wars between states with contrasting political and economic system may also be unthinkable because they have a history of friendly relations. So there can also be a possibility, like suppose if two countries they are sharing some other kind of bonds, they could be like religious homogeneity or say linguistic homogeneity or like some good friendly relations historically, then they also will not fight against each other. The examples that can be given is of Mexico and Cuba. There can be many more such examples. Second key value on liberal states that liberal scholars highlighted is, and it is also one of the key assertions of liberal scholars, and that is free trade. It leads to a more peaceful world order. This particular point was highlighted by Cobden. It is the core idea of 19th century liberalism. It is argued that trade brings mutual gains to all the players, irrespective of their size or the nature of their economies. It is perhaps not surprising that it was Britain that this particular argument find its most vocal supporters. One of the criticism for this particular argument was that the supposed universal value of free trade sometimes brought disproportionate gains to the hegemonic power. There was never an admission that free trade among countries at different stages of development would lead to relations of dominance and subservience. So it is not that when you engage in trade with other states, it is always a fair games. So definitely the states which are economically more prosperous or that are having a control over institution or the terms of trade, they are definitely going to gain more, and not all the states get equal benefits of this exchange. The idea of a natural harmony of interest in international political and economic relations came under challenge in the early part of the 20th century. The fact that Britain and Germany had highly interdependent economies before the Great War seemed to confirm the fatal flaw in the association of economic interdependence with peace. So, when we critically analyze this particular assertion by liberal scholars, like if you engage in trade, then the possibility of war would definitely come down. So, if you see the relationship between Germany and Britain, they were interdependent economies of Europe before World War I. Yet their economic interdependency couldn't prevent them to become one of the bitter enemies and one of the key players of World War I. Now here, the next thing that we are going to discuss is that how the liberal scholars or the liberal scholars, they have progressed, or what are their views during the interwar period. It means the period between World War I and World War II. The First World War shifted liberal thinking towards a recognition that peace is not a natural condition, but it is one that must be constructed. It means that peace is not natural. You have to put a lot of effort and hard work, and you have to do some kind of structural arrangement also to ensure that peace prevails. In a powerful critique of the idea that peace and prosperity were part of a latent natural order, the publicist and author Leonard Woolf argued that peace and prosperity required consciously devised machinery. So again, he emphasized that peace is to be maintained and it needs to be institutionalized. According to US President Woodrow Wilson, peace could only be secured with the creation of an international organization to regulate international anarchy. Security could not be left to secret bilateral diplomatic deals and a blind faith in the balance of power. So Woodrow Wilson also highlighted the importance of some international organization that help in maintaining peace, because international peace and security, it cannot be left on states that indulge in secret bilateral diplomatic deals, and we cannot also blindly rely or trust the balance of power. Liberal scholars, they have here also given a domestic analogy, like just as peace has to be enforced in domestic society, in the international domain, it also have to have a system of regulation for coping with disputes and an international force which could be mobilized if non-violent conflict resolution failed. In this sense, more than any other stand of liberalism, idealism rests on the domestic analogy. So here, when we see this argument, then liberal scholars here says that the way in order to maintain internal peace and security, you need to have a police force and agencies that enforce peace. Similarly, at the international level also, you require an organized institution or an organized police force or a military that would enforce rule and order to maintain peace. In his famous 14 points speech addressed to Congress in January 1918, Woodrow Wilson argued that a general association of nations must be formed to preserve the coming peace. The League of Nations was to be that general association. League of Nations, it was also a collective security system because for the League to be effective, it had to have the military power to deter aggression and when necessary to use a preponderance of power to enforce its will. But when League failed to do it, it also failed to prevent the Second World War. Collective security here needs some elaboration. So, collective security refers to an international, to an arrangement where each state in the system accepts that security of one is the concern of all and agrees to join in a collective response to aggression. It is mentioned in Article 16 of League of Nations. After World War I and after the failure of League of Nations uh, and after Second World War, now once again they have created another institution that was United Nations, and the United Nations play a similar kind of role to maintain peace and security globally. Liberal scholars also emphasized on the self-determination rights of all the nations. So going back to the mid-19th century, self-determination movements in Greece, Hungary and Italy received lot of support from liberal powers and public opinion. The fourth part of our discussion is focused on like what is the position or what are the changes that came in liberal thinking after World War II. So here the first important contribution that was made, it was made by integration theorist David Metternich. David Metternich argued that transnational cooperation was required in order to resolve common problems. His core concept was ramification, meaning the likelihood that cooperation in one sector would lead government to extend the range of cooperation across other sectors. It means that if you start cooperating in the field of economy or in the field of trade, then definitely that cooperation would also reflect in cooperation in other areas. As state becomes more embedded in an integration process, the cost of withdrawing from cooperative ventures increases. So once you became part of a larger cooperative arrangement, then the cost of withdrawing from that cooperative arrangement, it also increases, and generally states they never prefer to withdraw from it and continue with it. Transnational cooperation during 1960s and 70s can be seen in that light. Another important assertion made by realist scholars is complex interdependence. Robert Cohen and Joseph Nye, they have argued that the centrality of other actors such as interest groups, transnational corporations and international non-governmental organizations, it had to be taken into consideration. So here we cannot simply reach on some conclusions by taking only the states as the primary actor in international relations. So now there are multiple actors that are not only influencing the behavior of the state or deterring the behavior of the state, but they are also creating certain kind of order at the international level. For example, transnational corporations are there, various kind of interest groups are there, many international non-governmental organizations are there, and they also have an important role in global affairs. Hence, the overriding image of international relation is one of the cobweb of diverse actors that are linked through multiple channels of interactions. This is also important because now it is not just the official channel on which the states have to rely to improve their relations. So there are multiple channels available. So there are private players also that help in improving the ties between states. There are multinational corporations, then there are these international NGOs, then there can be global mass media that can also play an important role in the era of globalization. social media is playing an important role in improving the ties between states and also improving people-to-people contacts. Apart from that, complex interdependence theorists also highlighted this particular point that domestic pressures, they also deter the behavior or balance the behavior of states, because the absolute state autonomy is generally questioned by the citizens of the state itself. This example we can also see in case of America, when American people, they have started opposing American war in Vietnam. Another major strand or another major contribution of liberalism is neoliberalism. Neoliberalism is a bit different from earlier form of liberalism. It highlighted this particular point that academic inquiry, it should be guided by a commitment to a scientific approach to theory building. So neoliberalism emphasized on theory building. So whatever that is deeply held as personal values that scholars maintain, their task must be to observe regularities, formulate hypotheses as to why that relationship holds, and subject to critical scrutiny. This separation of fact and value put neoliberals on the positivist side of the methodological divide. Second, writers such as Cohen are critical of the naive assumption of 19th century liberal that commerce breeds peace. A free trade system, according to Cohen, provides incentives for cooperation but does not guarantee it. It means that if you engage in cooperation, if you engage in trade, if you believe in interdependency, then definitely it is going to help the state and both the states will prosper, but it is not a guarantee. It may encourage the state, it can act as an incentive, but it is not a guarantee that all the state would agree to it. Here he is making an important distinction between cooperation and harmony. So cooperation is not automatic. Cohen argued it requires planning and negotiation. Another major contribution of liberalism is neoliberal institutionalism or institutional theory of liberalism. So neoliberal institutionalism, you can say that it is the latest version of liberal scholars or the liberal contribution in the field of IR. So neoliberal institutionalism, it broadly agrees that international system is anarchic and states are rational unitary actors. So here there is a similarity between neoliberal scholars and realist scholars, but they believe that cooperation is nonetheless possible through international regimes and institutions. They also believe that states tend to focus on long-term benefits than short-term goals. So when we say that states, they give importance to their long-term benefits, if the states believe in that, then the states would definitely focus on economic cooperations. Then they prioritize stability and peace over war or any kind of short-term gains that a state may get through indulging in those wars and conflicts. International institutions, it has an important role in improving international relations among states. Joseph M. Greco and G. John Ickenberry suggest in state power and world markets, its main purpose is to serve as a mediator to find solutions to interstate problems. So international institutions, they not only foster cooperation among states, they not only encourage them to indulge in exchange or to interact with each other or to have common consensus or to find some kind of solutions to peaceful means rather than indulging in wars, etc. So by encouraging the member states, they serve the role of a mediator to find out the problems between or among states. This particular point, that since countries are now so connected between each other, international watchdogs are necessary to maintain the rules that they should be fair to everyone. So when we look at the world around us today, so there are a lot of international organizations, and states are part of multiple arrangements. Since now all the states are part of different regional international organization, it becomes very important that the rules of that exchange or that trade, they should be fair to everyone. It is here when institutions such as the United Nations, International Monetary Fund and World Trade Organization, they step in. So it is their responsibility that they should act not in favor of any particular state or group of states. Rather, the terms of exchange or engagement, it should be fair to all. Their role is to be a guide for affiliated countries to promote cooperation to resolve global economic and political issues, thus making member states better off. The last contribution, although it is not the last because liberal thinking or liberal contribution in IER, it is ever going. So, but another important contribution that we can see by liberal scholars is the end of history thesis. In 1989, Francis Fukuyama, he wrote an article entitled The End of History, which celebrated the triumph of liberalism over all other ideologies, contending that liberal states were more stable internally and more peaceful in their international relations. So there are some key assertions and observations made by Francis Fukuyama when he said that liberalism is triumphant and it has a decisive edge, comparative edge over all other ideologies in state. And he also make this assertion that liberal states, they are comparatively more stable internally and they are also more peaceful because liberal countries, liberal states or democratic states, they rarely fight against each other. Fukuyama also claimed in the early 90s that the collapse of the Soviet Union proved his particular point that liberal democracy had no serious ideological competitor. It was the end point of mankind's ideological evolution and the final form of human government. So Fukuyama here, says that democracy, it is the best political system that is left, and capitalism, it is triumphant over, say, socialism or communism. But when we see all these claims today, then they seem exaggerated because it is not that all the states are following the same trajectory in the liberal world order, liberal institutional international world order. So it is also faltering at certain points. Frictions are also coming. But definitely we cannot deny that liberal scholars, they have a very, very important role to play, not only in balancing the realist point of view or realist arguments in international relations, but also paving the way for cooperation, peace, stability, etc. Hope you find this lecture interesting. Thank you.